The Aztecs say they were part of the 7 tribes that came from the 7 chambers of Chiquimostoc.
What if the story of the Aztecs wasn't what we thought? Not just mighty warriors and golden temples, but a people with hidden struggles and shocking secrets? Scientists are now reading the Aztecs' DNA, their own bodies telling stories history forgot. These tests reveal a past full of mystery, hardship, and unexpected connections. Today, we'll dive into what DNA uncovers about the real Aztecs and why it changes everything we knew. The truth about the Aztecs.
Today I'm going to tell you the story of how, before the people we now call Aztecs built an empire that shocked the world.
Imagine holding a tiny piece of history in your hand, a tooth, a fragment of bone, a clue left behind by someone who lived hundreds of years ago. Scientists are now doing something extraordinary with these tiny pieces. They're reading the Aztecs' DNA, unraveling secrets that no book, no statue, and no painting could ever tell us. DNA is like a hidden diary of a civilization, written in the very cells of the people themselves.
And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird.
And when we read it, we discover stories that are surprising, sometimes shocking, and always human. For centuries, the Aztecs have been remembered as fearsome warriors, brilliant builders, and keepers of golden treasures. Their temples, markets, and art fascinated explorers, historians, and the world at large.
But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs.
But history can be selective. It loves the dramatic tales of kings, battles, and sacrifices, yet hides the everyday lives, struggles, and even tragedies of ordinary people. That's where DNA comes in. Unlike chronicles or legends, DNA doesn't exaggerate or forget. It records everything. By carefully extracting genetic material from remains buried in ancient cemeteries across central Mexico, researchers are peering back in time. And what they find is fascinating. The Aztecs were not a pure or isolated group.
The Aztec rulers are skillful statesmen. Everything in their empire is perfectly regulated.
Instead, their genes tell a story of mixing and migration, connecting them to other Mesoamerican civilizations like the Toltecs and Olmecs. These connections suggest that the Aztecs were shaped by centuries of movement, marriage, and interaction with neighbors. They weren't a single, unbroken warrior race, but a rich tapestry of people, traditions, and bloodlines woven together over generations. Even more intriguing, DNA can reveal the health and struggles of past populations. Some Aztec remains show signs of malnutrition, disease, and repeated physical stress. Bones carry marks of injuries and trauma, hinting at a life that could be as harsh as it was fascinating. Think of a bustling city with grand temples, lively markets, and colorful ceremonies, but also a society where many endured pain, hunger, and danger. DNA gives us a window into both the glory and the hardship side by side, showing that the Aztecs were not just legends on paper, but real people with complex lives.
Was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today.
Genetic evidence also shines a light on social inequalities. Just as today, where life can vary dramatically depending on where you live or who you are, the Aztecs' genes suggest differences between elites and commoners. Health, nutrition, and even life expectancy were not the same for everyone. This invisible history, preserved in bones, reminds us that empires are not just made of kings and warriors. They are built on the backs of ordinary people, and DNA is finally giving those people a voice. Perhaps the most dramatic revelations come from the traces of conquest and integration. The Aztec Empire expanded by absorbing neighboring communities. DNA from these populations appears in Aztec remains, silently telling the story of empires built on movement, assimilation, and, sometimes, suffering. These hidden threads of conquest and kinship are not mentioned in textbooks, but are written plainly in the genetic record. It's as if the Aztecs' bodies themselves are whispering stories that history never fully captured. In many ways, DNA acts as a detective, piecing together mysteries from the tiniest clues. It can reconstruct family trees, trace where ancestors came from, and even hint at diet, disease, and daily life. For the Aztecs, this means we can finally begin to see the full picture. A civilization vibrant and powerful, but also vulnerable, human, and connected in ways that history alone could never show. The takeaway is simple but powerful. The Aztecs weren't just the myths of warriors and golden cities. They were real people, messy, resilient, and intertwined with countless others across time and space. What did life look like for the real Aztecs beyond the temples and warrior? The people behind an empire.
Tenochtitlan was the capital of the Aztec Empire. It was a humongous city for the time, with a population of about 200,000 people.
Before we dive deeper into what DNA reveals, it helps to understand who the Aztecs really were. Picture central Mexico in the 14th to 16th centuries. Vast lakes, floating gardens, bustling markets, and cities alive with color and music. At the heart of it all was Tenochtitlan, a city so grand it amazed the Spanish when they first arrived. Towering temples, intricate canals, and lively plazas made it feel like a world apart, a place full of ambition, creativity, and power. The Aztec society was carefully structured. At the top sat the emperor, seen as a divine ruler with authority over the empire's politics, religion, and military campaigns. Beneath him were nobles and priests who managed temples, schools, and ceremonies. Warriors were respected for their bravery and skill, often gaining honor through battles or capturing enemies. Commoners made up the largest group, tending fields, working in markets, or crafting tools and clothes. And then there were the enslaved, often captured in war or born into servitude, whose labor supported the empire's wealth and grandeur. We've often been told that the Aztecs were just fierce warriors obsessed with conquest. But that is only part of the story. They were also farmers, artisans, engineers, and thinkers. They created floating gardens called chinampas to grow crops on lakes, developed complex calendars, and built schools where children learned reading, math, and moral lessons. Their culture was vibrant, full of art, music, poetry, and rituals that connected people to their gods and each other. However, life in the Aztec Empire was not easy for everyone. Society was strict, and rules governed behavior, family life, and social hierarchy. Nobles lived comfortably, while commoners worked hard to survive. Warfare and human sacrifice, often highlighted in history books, were part of a larger system of politics, religion, and survival. But these practices also reveal that Aztec life had a darker side, a side we can now explore in more depth through DNA. The Aztecs were a civilization of contrasts. They built astonishing cities, created rich culture, and displayed incredible ingenuity. Yet, behind the temples and ceremonies were ordinary people living challenging lives, navigating social pressure, disease, and the consequences of empire. Knowing who they were sets the stage for understanding what DNA reveals: a civilization even more complex, mixed, and human than anyone ever imagined. Family tree revealed.
So that's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that rubber-producing area of Mexico.
The Aztecs weren't born in isolation. Their story begins long before Tenochtitlan rose from the lakes of central Mexico. To understand who they were, we need to look at where their ancestors came from, and DNA gives us a surprising map of their past. Genetic studies show that the Aztecs were a mix of different Mesoamerican peoples. Their roots connect to the Toltecs, an earlier culture known for its art and architecture, and even further back to the mysterious Olmecs, sometimes called the mother civilization of the region.
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
This mixture wasn't accidental. It was the result of centuries of migration, trade, and intermarriage. Families moved, communities merged, and over generations, the Aztecs became a unique tapestry of genes and traditions. What does this mean in simpler terms? Imagine a city where every family tells a slightly different story about where they came from. Some came from the north, some from the south, and some were descendants of travelers who had crossed mountains and deserts long before. The Aztecs were not a single, pure group, as old myths sometimes claim. They were the product of movement, connection, and diversity. DNA proves that even centuries ago, human history was full of mixing and change, not isolation. This genetic diversity also hints at how the Aztecs built their empire. As they expanded, they absorbed other peoples into their society. Some became allies, some became neighbors, and others were conquered. Over time, these populations blended through marriage and daily life. In a way, the Aztec Empire was not just political or military. It was also a living network of families, tribes, and communities, all intertwined in ways that weren't always recorded in history books. DNA also uncovers surprises about migration patterns. Some lineages suggest that people traveled much farther than previously believed, carrying their genes and cultures across vast distances. This shows that the Aztecs' story is not just about the Central Lakes or their famous capital. It's part of a larger regional history full of connections, movement, and unexpected journeys. The bigger takeaway is clear. The Aztecs were never a monolithic warrior race. They were a diverse, dynamic people shaped by centuries of travel, mixing, and adaptation. Their strength came not only from warriors or rulers, but from the richness of their combined histories and backgrounds. By tracing these genetic threads, scientists can see the Aztecs as real, living people, connected to neighbors, relatives, and distant ancestors, rather than just a legend in gold and stone. And this diversity is just the beginning of the story, hinting at how life, struggle, and survival played out in ways we're only starting to understand. So, how healthy were the Aztecs, and what can their bones tell us about their lives? Darker truths on their health and society. While the Aztecs are often remembered for their grand temples, fierce warriors, and colorful festivals, DNA tells a story of life that was far more complicated and sometimes much harsher. Beneath the grandeur, many people faced challenges that textbooks rarely mention: disease, malnutrition, and the physical toll of daily life.
But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs.
Bones and teeth are like tiny history books, recording what people endured. When scientists examine them, they can see signs of illness, stress, and injury. In Aztec remains, researchers found evidence of malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies, suggesting that even in a wealthy empire, not everyone had enough to eat. Life was especially difficult for children, whose growth and health could be severely affected by a lack of proper nutrition. DNA even helps reveal how long people lived and how their bodies coped with disease, offering a glimpse into daily survival hundreds of years ago. Trauma on bones shows that warfare, hunting accidents, or ritual sacrifices were part of many lives. For men, being a warrior came with obvious risks, but even non-combatants could experience injuries from accidents, heavy labor, or conflict. DNA evidence, combined with forensic studies, reveals that these wounds were common and often repeated, a reminder that life in the Aztec Empire could be physically demanding and dangerous. Social inequality made a difference too. Nobles and priests, who lived in cities or controlled resources, generally had better nutrition and health care, while commoners and enslaved people endured harder lives. Their DNA reflects these disparities. Scientists can detect differences in stress markers, bone strength, and nutritional deficiencies, showing that social class wasn't just a matter of wealth or power, it literally affected the body. Even more sobering, DNA hints at the invisible burdens people carried. High stress, repeated pregnancies, long hours of labor, and exposure to disease left marks on the body that persist for centuries. These traces remind us that the Aztec Empire, while magnificent on the surface, was also a society where survival required constant effort and resilience. Everyday life could be grueling, and only a few lived comfortably while many others struggled quietly. Yet, there is something profoundly human in these findings. Seeing the evidence of hardship doesn't diminish the Aztecs' achievements. It deepens our understanding of them. Their remarkable cities, complex social systems, and rich culture existed alongside very real challenges. DNA allows us to appreciate the brilliance of their civilization while also acknowledging the struggles and inequalities that shaped it. The Aztecs were not only warriors and architects of empire, they were human beings living in a world that demanded strength, endurance, and adaptability. By examining their DNA, we can see their daily lives in a way that history alone could never capture. The bones tell a story of resilience, hardship, and survival, a reminder that the story of a great civilization is also the story of its people. Slavery and conquest. Empires are often remembered for their grand achievements, towering cities, powerful armies, and sprawling territories. But behind every empire lies another story, a story of conquest, displacement, and human lives forever changed. For the Aztecs, DNA reveals that their rise to power was deeply tied to the people they conquered, and the systems of labor and slavery they relied upon to maintain their empire. The Aztec Empire didn't grow in isolation. It expanded across central Mexico through warfare, alliances, and strategic marriages. When neighboring communities resisted, the Aztecs often took captives, many of whom became slaves or were used in ritual sacrifices. DNA evidence from burial sites shows traces of these populations within the Aztec genetic record, quietly testifying to the lives of people who were absorbed into the empire, sometimes by force. These genetic traces are a stark reminder that the wealth, power, and cultural achievements of the Aztecs were built not just by the elite, but also on the labor and presence of those they conquered. Slavery in Aztec society was different from what we often think of today, but it was still harsh. Enslaved people could be prisoners of war, debtors, or even members of their own community who had fallen into servitude. They worked in households, farms, and marketplaces. DNA and forensic analysis indicate that these individuals often experienced physical strain far greater than their free counterparts, leaving markers on bones from heavy labor or repetitive motion. This scientific evidence shows that while the Aztecs are remembered for their grand architecture and art, the human cost of building that empire was immense. Interestingly, DNA also reveals stories of integration. Conquered peoples were not always kept completely separate. Over time, many intermarried with the local population. Their genes became part of the broader Aztec identity, subtly reshaping the genetic landscape of the empire. In a sense, the empire was not only a political and military structure, but also a living, human network of families and communities, woven together by both force and cooperation. These genetic connections illustrate a complex social reality. Conquest created suffering, but it also created bonds, blending cultures and lineages in ways history alone cannot fully capture. The DNA evidence also challenges some long-held assumptions about the scale and impact of Aztec conquests. Some lineages suggest that entire communities were moved from one region to another, often over long distances, carrying their customs, languages, and knowledge with them. These population movements weren't just military strategies, They were part of how the empire maintained control, integrated new territories, and ensured loyalty. The human cost of these movements was real. People had to adapt to new lands, new rulers, and sometimes harsh conditions. Yet, these displacements also left a lasting mark, contributing to the rich diversity found in the Aztec population. But conquest wasn't just about power. How did it connect to Aztec religion and rituals? Conquest and slavery were also tied to ritual life. Many captives were sacrificed in religious ceremonies, which were central to Aztec cosmology. While this practice might seem shocking to modern eyes, DNA helps contextualize it. It shows patterns of trauma and age distribution among the sacrificed, revealing that the victims were often taken from conquered communities. These findings remind us that religion, politics, and warfare were deeply intertwined, and that conquest was not merely about land or resources, but also about maintaining social and spiritual order. Even within conquered territories, life was complex.
Giant megalithic constructions, what they're most famous for.
Some communities retained local leadership, traditions, and autonomy, while others were fully integrated into Aztec governance. DNA shows how these groups merged over time. In some families, genes from distant regions appear side by side with local lineages, illustrating centuries of interaction, negotiation, and blending. The empire was not just a machine of domination. It was a network of people with interconnected lives, stories, and struggles. What makes these revelations so striking is that they humanize history. Conquest is often described in terms of kings, battles, and territory. But DNA lets us see the individuals behind those events. The families forced to leave their homes, the children born into slavery, the communities reshaped by war. It shows that the Aztecs' glory was inseparable from the lives of those they conquered, people whose struggles and resilience became part of the very fabric of the empire. Ultimately, the Aztec Empire was built on a balance of power, cooperation, and coercion. DNA allows us to understand the complexity of that balance. It reveals not only the strategic genius of the Aztec rulers, but also the deep human consequences of empire. Lives uprooted, identities reshaped, and genetic legacies intertwined. By reading these genetic traces, we see that conquest and slavery were not peripheral elements of Aztec society. They were central to how the empire functioned, grew, and endured. Connecting bloodlines and beliefs. DNA doesn't just tell us where the Aztecs came from or what hardships they faced. It also gives clues about their culture and spirituality. Genetic patterns reveal family connections, showing how kinship shaped daily life, festivals, and rituals. Families weren't just small units. They formed networks that stretched across regions, helping communities support each other, share traditions, and maintain social bonds. These connections also influenced religious practices. Ancestors, gods, and rituals were deeply tied to family and community life. DNA hints at who might have performed ceremonies, who inherited certain roles, and how traditions were passed down. In a way, the Aztecs' genes carry the memory of their culture, a blueprint of social ties, beliefs, and shared experiences. By reading their DNA, we see a civilization where human connection and spiritual life were as important as temples and warriors, giving the Aztecs a truly human story. From warriors to families, the Aztecs were more human than history let on. Keep their legacy alive with a prayer, and don't forget to subscribe.